All right. So let's get started. Let me get my big Yeti cup out of the way here, my water. All right. What are we talking about today? Well, I'll tell you what we're talking about today. We are talking about Joe Jorgensen and Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We're going to be talking about these candidates, and I'm going to go through why it is that I will be voting for Joe Jorgensen as opposed to either the candidates from the Republican or Democrat parties. I'm going to be talking specifically about what my issues are, the issues I think are most important to our country right now, as well as the reasons that I don't feel Donald Trump or Joe Biden can solve those problems, and why the libertarian answer at this point is absolutely the best answer. So, with no further ado, let's get diving in. Now, if this is your first time watching me, do me a big favor and subscribe to the channel. If you like the content, I'd really appreciate that. I'm trying to prove. What is it? Proof of concept is what they would call it. I think I'm trying to show my wife that I'm not just wasting my time in here. So if I get those subscriptions up, at least I can tell her that, hey, some people are at least listening to what I have to say. So that would be super helpful. Just go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like the content, and share it. Thank you very much. So I'm voting for Joe Jorgensen. I'm a libertarian. I don't think anybody who's been at this channel before, and if you can't tell by the display behind me, I am a libertarian through and through. Although there are things with the party that I don't agree with, I think that everybody has some items with their political party that they don't necessarily agree with. So, yeah, it's not perfect, but I don't think there's any such thing as perfection. What I'm looking for is a candidate that I don't find objectionable. One of the interesting things about our political climate right now is that I think there are Republicans and Democrats who are both saying, I don't want to have to vote for this person. I don't want to vote for this person. There's a meme going around, please don't make me vote for Joe Biden. As the nomination process was going on, it started looking like that was going to happen. You see the walk away campaign on the left with a lot of Democrats just very unsatisfied with Joe Biden, and even more so now with his pick of Kamala Harris as the VP. I think that it's pretty obvious that there are plenty of what you would call more mainstream establishment Republicans who are not happy at all with Donald Trump. So a lot of people are looking at their political parties and they're saying that I'm dissatisfied. I don't like the leadership of the Republican Party. I don't like the leadership of the Democrat Party. I don't feel like my voice is being heard. And what's happening is these people are switching parties, but they're not walking away from the two-party system. And one of the interesting things that libertarian Larry Sharpe said was, if you want better Democrats and you want better Republicans, then you have to vote libertarian. If you let them know that no matter who they nominate, you're going to stay in the two-party duopoly, that you're not willing to walk away from this power structure of the two political parties, they can just keep putting out people that you don't like. The Democrat Party, I don't think, is listening to what's happening. I talked a little bit about this Wednesday, with, I think the nomination, quite frankly, from Joe Biden of Kamala Harris is a slap in the face to every Democrat who's out there marching with Black Lives Matter. And I don't think that race is a party issue per se, but I think that it's safe to say that a lot of people marching out there and demonstrating with Black Lives Matter would identify themselves as Democrat. And you can't look at a pick like Kamala Harris and say Joe Biden's listening to us. And so there's a lot of dissatisfaction on the Democrat side. On the Republican side, I think there's a lot of issues with Donald Trump that aren't necessarily just the way he speaks and his abrupt nature and all those things. I think there's a lot of very leftist tendencies to Donald Trump. And I'm going to get into all of that through the course of this video. But I really want to start with, on a positive note, I want to start talking about Joe Jorgensen herself and kind of what I think the major issues facing our country are. Now, I understand that we're in the middle of this pandemic, and I understand that we have an economic crisis as a result of it. And so the number one issue today under a microscope, in a narrow view, is dealing with this pandemic, of course, and then how are we going to come out of this and recover economically. So I get that that's the issue that's on the forefront of most people's minds, but we have to take a long view about the future of this country. And we have to really think about, in the long run, what kind of policies and what kind of actions we want our leadership taking to get this country back where it belongs. So when I talk about the issues facing the United States, I think one of our biggest issues is the amount of money that we are spending on our military. We have this massive military budget. I think it's larger than the next 7 countries combined. We're spending close to $1 trillion $770 billion just on military spending alone. But when you roll in Department of Homeland Security and you roll in TSA, you're looking at $1 trillion. Folks, that's half of the money you pay in income tax that goes into the discretionary budget. Half of what the income tax collected on the individual level is going into military. So when we talk about not being able to fund certain things and we have to cut this and we have to cut that, the first place we should be looking is at what's eating up 50% of our budget, what's ending up 50% of our discretionary budget is military spending. When you look at a Donald Trump wanting to increase the size of that budget, I go, this is not a conservative. This is certainly not a person who's fiscally conservative. When you look at Jo Jorgensen's stance on the military, she has an exact right idea of what our military is supposed to be. It goes all the way back to what the founding fathers thought our nation was supposed to be, and certainly what our military was supposed to be. And that is, she uses the phrase "one giant Switzerland." Now, obviously, she's just talking about Switzerland's military position, not the rest of their government, but a government and a military that's armed and capable of defending the nation, but isn't functioning as a global police force. Jo Jorgensen wants to bring the 200,000 troops stationed all over the world back to the United States, reduce our military so that it is capable of defending the United States, but isn't taking on the role as a global police officer. And the argument against this has always been from both sides, from Democrats and Republicans, that's isolationist. It's not isolationist. Switzerland is not an isolationist nation. I want free trade with everybody. I want us dealing with all these different countries economically. I want a better immigration system so people can come into the country properly vetted, but without these 10-year waiting lists, so we can de-incentivize illegal immigration. I want those things. I don't want an isolationist America, but I don't want an America that's spending $1 trillion a year on military and defense type spending. That is ridiculous. The United States is more than capable of defending itself. And a massive reduction in our military spending would not leave us vulnerable to any kind of an attack. That's a ridiculous thought. So she's the only candidate. She's the only one talking about this. I think if you look 10, 15 years back, you at least had lip service from the Democrats about cutting military spending. I think the last time you got real conversations about reducing military spending was the Clinton administration. But you can't just cut the spending. You have to reduce the mission. And we have to start looking at our country and the debt that we have and the issues we have internally and saying we are not in a position any longer from an economic perspective to be the sole provider of security globally. That's not our role. Not only is it not our role, it's not our right to be doing this. And quite frankly, we just can't afford it anymore. So Jo Jorgensen is the only candidate in the race who's actually talking about reducing military spending and creating a proper mission for our military, which is home defense and defending the United States of America. The second issue that Jo Jorgensen and I align on very closely is the war on drugs. Now, let me be clear, because I know that what people like to say about the Libertarian Party is, well, they're just Republicans who want to smoke pot. Well, first of all, I'm not a pot smoker. Second, this isn't about wanting to do drugs, people. We have to look at the damage that the war on drugs is doing, both here in the United States and abroad. And first and foremost, here in the United States, the war on drugs is what's responsible for mass incarceration. Per capita, the land of the free incarcerates more of its citizens than any other country in the world. That is ridiculous. I mean, it is insane. We talk about mass incarceration in this country like it's a race issue, and it's not a race issue. Since the war on drugs began, the white prison population in this country has risen 240%, while the black prison population has risen 280%. Everybody's being incarcerated. This impacts everyone. And it is sowing the seeds of racism in this country. It is breaking up homes. It is largely responsible for a lot of, look, you get a father who is dealing drugs maybe as a way to feed his family. He ends up in prison. You've got these mandatory minimum prison sentences. You're breaking up families, all because we want to control people's behavior. And the resistance to ending the war on drugs is that you're going to have higher drug use. You're going to have more kids using drugs. And there's no evidence of that. In fact, all the evidence actually speaks to the exact opposite. When you look at what Portugal did when they decriminalized, use went up, addiction went down, crime went down, and use amongst youth went down. So Portugal's experiment with decriminalizing drugs has been wildly successful. It's not talked about. And again, this is another issue that the other two candidates, in my opinion, are just wrong on. And we've gotten to this place in the government where nobody wants to unwind a bad policy anymore. We were able to, I'm looking at my feed here and it doesn't look like it's coming across right. So hopefully it looks like it's way behind me. Guys who are watching, comment quick if there's an issue with my feed here. I haven't heard anything, so hopefully it's going okay. But anyway, I'm going to keep going and assume that everything's all right. But the bottom line is that nobody else is talking about this, and nobody else has the right position on this. And that's a serious problem. And that's the issue with both candidates want to continue this prohibition. Donald Trump obviously is on the side of prohibition. And when you look at the nomination of Kamala Harris as the vice president, and you look at her prosecutorial history in California, she has no problem locking people up for owning a plant. So that's a major, major issue. And again, I think it's a slap in the face. And when we look at our history, we tried prohibition before. We tried it with alcohol, and it failed so miserably that we had to end it. Crime went up. Organized crime went up. Police deaths went up. Civilian deaths went up. It's a disaster. Prohibition doesn't work. So we need to take all that resource and we need to convert it to rehabilitation, both in our prison systems, and we have to treat drug addiction as the mental issue that it actually is and not a criminal issue. And we need to treat these people with respect so addicts can get help and they're not ostracized from their communities and from society, but that they can go out and get the help that they need. I'm gonna slow down here. My stream is acting awfully wonky. I hope it's coming across okay. But anyway, that's the mass incarceration. And then when you think about the war on drugs, you also have to remember that an authoritarian government, a government that has way too much power and way too much reason to intervene in their citizens' day-to-day lives, is always going to impact minority communities and people who are vulnerable first. So you think about when the drug war was enacted, this was right after we decided to go after drugs right after the Civil Rights Act was signed. So obviously the African-American community, the Black community in this country, was at a major disadvantage to the white community. So it is impacting the African-American community first. They have a reason to view this as systemic racism. But if you look at the growth of the prison population of both white and Blacks, you can see that this is something that we all need to be addressing together. And so when we talk about the domestic side, it's the mass incarceration, it's the racial division that it sows. It's obviously a police state where police are pulling people over and interacting with the population way too much. And it's almost all in the name of the war on drugs. The other side of it, the external issue is that it's given rise to these multi-billion-dollar drug cartels all throughout South America. So we've got this huge crisis on the border with all these people trying to get into the country. And, you know, on the right, they'll say, well, if you don't like the way things are in your country, stay there and fix it, so on and so forth. What they're not talking about is the fact that their governments in South America are completely overwhelmed and outgunned by these massively powerful cartels. So not only do we need to end the war on drugs here in the United States, but we need to be working with our partners south of the border to have them move towards decriminalization. We need to take the power away from the drug cartels. We need to get rid of the perverse incentive, which is the incredibly high profit margins of selling drugs, and end the war on drugs. And that's going to ease the immigration crisis on our southern border as these countries become more peaceful and they're not controlled by these violent drug cartels. So war on drugs isn't just about a group of people who want to do drugs or smoke pot. It's about looking at the issues through our society and throughout the world and the ramifications that our war on drugs and what prohibition has in general. So that's another issue that Jo Jorgensen is right on. She's right out there in front, and the other two candidates aren't talking about it because they're just pandering to their bases right now. And the third issue is, of course, education. We need a better educational system. This isn't rocket science. It's plainly obvious that our education system is failing. And when you look at what the candidates are, that's status quo from our education system, Department of Education, you know, centralized curriculum. I think that Betty DeVos and Trump are closer to being right on this. The left just wants to keep pumping money into the public school system, which I think is an absolute disaster. One of the interesting things about people on the left is they want us to copy Norway's or Sweden's, I don't know, Norway or Sweden, their healthcare system, their universal healthcare system. I say we should copy their educational system. The way they educate their kids there is the people get the money in a voucher type system. That's how they run their healthcare or their education there. And then the parents can take that money and they can go seek out what they feel are the best educational opportunities for their kids. So when you look at a country like that with the population of what, 10 million, we're talking about Sweden, a population of about 10 million, there's still a pretty wide variety of what people want to do and what people feel is best for their own kids. You look at a population like the United States, geographically spread out, racially diverse, ethnically diverse, with major cities, rural communities, just a huge diverse way of doing things. It makes zero sense to have a large amount of our educational system controlled by a central government. That doesn't make any sense. The needs of rural kids and inner city kids and kids from, mid-sized cities, people in the South, people in the North, everybody's got different values. And the parents and the teachers should be able to work together to create an educational system that works in their communities. And they shouldn't be getting their marching orders from some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. who's never even been to their town. I mean, that's literally how we're managing education right now, is we have this core curriculum that comes from the Department of Education. And Joe Jorgensen wants to eliminate the Department of Education altogether, that's what we need to do. We don't need to cut it back. We don't need to shrink it. The Department of Education needs to go away. It was founded in 1979. Prior to the founding of the Department of Education, or the creation of the Department of Education, the U.S. educational standards were tops in the world. And it's been a steady decline ever since. And we fight over this. And when Bush was president, it was No Child Left Behind, and there was Common Core, and all these different things, and all these different presidents, and all these different bureaucrats in DC keep trying to change how we're running the educational system. And it's a monolithic, singular, top-down way of managing. And that just doesn't work. They can't answer the needs of the local communities. They can't understand the needs of the local communities. And Joe Jorgensen wants to end the Department of Education and return that control back over to the teachers and students. And quite frankly, or the teachers and the parents. And quite frankly, I trust teachers and parents when it comes to making decisions for their children a lot more than I trust Washington, D.C. So those are my top three issues with Joe Jorgensen. I think they're the top three issues facing our nation. If we can solve those three problems, then we can really start moving forward. We can get rid of our military spending to a point where we can start investing in our nation instead of protecting the world. We can end the war on drugs. We can end mass incarceration, and we can fix our educational system by returning control over to the local communities. That's what Joe Jorgensen stands for, and that's why I'm voting for her. Now, why can't I vote for Joe Biden? I think anybody who knows me well knows why I can't vote for Joe Biden. First and foremost, he is an authoritarian who wrote the 94 crime bill. You're going to hear this throughout the election, and and quite frankly, I don't understand the nomination, to be honest with you. Donald Trump's going to pound him over the head with this. I don't know that Joe Biden can win. I know what the polls are saying. I don't believe Joe Biden's going to win. I think that he's a betrayal of what the Democrats have been screaming, what the left has been screaming for the last 2 months. The 94 crime bill literally militarized the police. That's how we ended up here. You got Reagan's crime bill in the 80s, which put more police on the street. But then you've got the 94 crime bill, which really militarized the police, pushed all this equipment, and hey, if they got the equipment, they've got to use it. So the 94 crime bill it boggles the mind that that's who's going to get the Democrat nomination in the environment that our nation's in right now. I can't vote for somebody who thought it was okay to militarize the police and has not stepped back from it and has been very proud of it. He's bragged about it. And then you look at his vice presidential choice of Kamala Harris and you say, yeah, this is what I believe. And I don't care that they're going where the wind blows right now. They may be saying but I look at their actions throughout their entire political careers and I say, these are authoritarians who are going to double down on mass incarceration. We're going to double down on the war on drugs. And it's just going to continue to divide the nation. The other thing is Joe Biden isn't new. I think a lot of people love blaming Donald Trump for everything that's wrong in this country. And we forget that he's only been president of the United States for 3 years. And prior to this disastrous coronavirus outbreak, and you can blame him for it or not blame him, that's a whole nother conversation. But throughout this whole thing, or throughout Joe Biden's entire political career, what has he done? Where was he on all of these issues before? And the bottom line is nowhere. 8 years under Obama, and what did we get? Where was the improvement in any of these issues? He's not new. He's been around. He's part of the structure that's been created that's dividing this country the way it is. So I can't vote for him because it's very obvious to look up where he is and who he is and figure out where he stands on things. My stream is going nuts on my screen here, so I certainly hope this is going out okay. I'm nervous about how my stream is looking. But and then we have under the Obama administration, where Joe Biden did play a major role, we had two massive foreign interventions in Syria and Libya, and that led to incredibly high loss of life and another immigration crisis with the Syrian immigrants. We toppled two regimes. We left those countries in shambles, thousands and thousands of innocent civilians killed. And this was he was part of that administration. He played a major role in it all. So he's not anti-war. He's a war hawk Democrat. So again, we're talking about a big military doing lots of things, being all over the world. So I can't support him on that. Obviously, we've talked about the drug laws. We're going to have a more difficult regulatory environment. We're going to have higher taxes under Biden. He's come out and said he's going to raise taxes. So that's not even a question. I think we've seen what a president who rolls back regulations versus a president who increases regulations. I think we saw the effects of that on the economy. It creates more opportunity for people. This is a fundamental belief of the Libertarian Party, is that higher taxes are not good for the economy. If you're having an economic issue and you cut taxes because that's good for the economy, then raising taxes is never good for the economy. And Biden's come out and said he is going to raise taxes. You can look back at speeches and presentations that he's given. That's where he stands. And I think that under Joe Biden, you're going to see just the continued decline of public education. They don't have an answer for this. They have the standard Democrat answer of pumping more money into the system and hoping that solves the problem. And that doesn't solve the problem. That just gets the federal government even more involved. And they're going to keep trying to pull these little levers and make it better. But I don't see a plan from Joe Biden that's going to make our education system better. I think it's going to be more interference, more intervention, more federal involvement, and a further decline in our educational system. So those are pretty solid reasons to not vote for Joe Biden. And I'm one of the things I don't want to do here is talk about racism and all this other stuff that's going on right now, COVID-19, all the current debates. I'm talking about big policy, long-term United States of America. The Democrats and Republicans aren't in a position to solve these issues. So I'm a right-leaning libertarian. So there are left-leaning libertarians, there are right-leaning libertarians. I tend to lean to the right. But when I look at Donald Trump, there's still issues with him. And one of those things is we need somebody in the White House who believes in fiscal conservatism to some extent. Somebody's got to say, we can't just keep spending money like this. There's got to be a voice for that other than just your Rand Pauls and your Tom Masseys. There's got to be somebody in the White House who's reasonable and says, we can't just keep spending this money. And what I get back from Republicans when I talk about all his spending is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Well, pump the brakes on that, because the budget that he signed prior to the COVID-19 outbreak added $1 trillion to the debt. So he increased the budget deficit by $1 trillion in the budget he wrote pre-pandemic. So this is not a conservative president. He's asking for increases in military spending, and he's making virtually no spending cuts or really even proposing cuts anywhere else, except now he seems to be over the last week talking about perhaps going after Social Security and Medicare. That's a non-starter. You're not going to win that fight. It's a fight I'd like to win. I think there's a way that we can restructure this so that's sustainable in the long term. Something where we let younger people opt out of the system. We cut government in other places to keep the system afloat until such time as it kind of self-dissolves. But he's not really talking about a good solution there. He's not talking about shrinking government. He wants to spend, a massive amount of money on infrastructure, and he's not shrinking government anywhere else. So he's just another big government Republican. So I can't vote for him from that perspective. We're destroying the US dollar. I've been railing on this for a couple of months now. We are racking up debt to a point where the dollar is just going to end up collapsing. And if the rest of the world, if the left is right and the United States is mishandling COVID-19, or we're mishandling COVID-19 in comparison with the rest of the world, then we have to assume that the rest of the world is going to come out of this before us, and they'll stop devaluing their fiat currencies, and we'll be the last one left doing it. And then that will be the hyperinflationary dollar collapse event you're looking for. We need to start shoring up the dollar. We need to start protecting our budget. We need to start cutting our budget, balancing our budget, shrinking government spending so that we are on a long-term path to success. We're buying tomorrow with today's dollars, and it doesn't work. $26 trillion in debt, all these relief bills. The other thing is that, and Republicans yelled and screamed the whole time Obama was in office. Whenever he broke out that pen and signed an executive order, Republicans were just incensed and angry, and oh, he's abusing executive power. We can argue about each one of Obama's executive orders, whether or not it was an abuse of executive power or not. But at the end of the day, the extension of the unemployment benefits and some of the House of Representatives very clearly, from a constitutional perspective, controls the purse strings. They write the budgets. So an executive order that spends money like that massive amount of money, to me, is a clear abuse of presidential power, clear abuse of executive power. And I've said from the beginning, one of the things that concern me about Donald Trump is that he has a tendency to be very authoritarian. I think that's very obvious to anybody. Give me a second here. I think it's very obvious that he has authoritarian tendencies. He wants things done his way. And to say Congress isn't moving fast enough, I'm just going to take action. Where are the Republicans on this saying this is an abuse of power? He can't do that. They're nowhere. And so every time you get an authoritarian Republican president, you move the Republicans, who are supposed to be small government conservatives, and they're not. There's not even a semblance of small government, fiscal conservative, whatever, in the Republican Party anymore. And you keep pushing them more and more towards an authoritarian perspective when they're in power. Well, I've got an authoritarian left and an authoritarian right, and we have to put that to an end. So that's another reason. Obviously, I can't vote for Donald Trump. And, you know, again, with the war on drugs, this is another guy who's not talking about that. He's not out in front of it. We need leadership on these issues. We need leadership on education. We need leadership on military spending, and we need leadership in terms of our fiscal future. And neither party presents that. The only person talking about these issues with any level of reality is Jo Jorgensen. And that's why I will be voting for her, even though there are some things that I disagree with. There are some issues that I have with some of the things that she said, but I'm not voting for her because she's the lesser of two evils. I believe her to be a good candidate. I'm not holding my nose and voting for Jo Jorgensen. I'm not disappointed in her nomination. I understand reasonably that there's never going to be a candidate that I look at and go, this is a perfect candidate. And there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. I want to vote for a good candidate, and Jo Jorgensen is a good candidate, just from her positions, her platform. Jo20.com is her website. You can go there and check out all of her positions, learn about her. And if you understand how important it is to break the two-party system, and you actually want to vote for somebody that you can agree with, that has integrity, then this is the candidate for you. I mean, let's face it. Joe Biden has a credible sexual assault allegation against him. Trump has numerous. I think both of these men have problematic relationships when it comes to dealing with the opposite sex. Very problematic. I know obviously we're not going to have that issue with Dr. Jorgensen. There's just, like I said, there's a lot of people leaving both sides. There's a lot of people walking away from the Republican Party because they're dissatisfied. There's a lot of people walking away from the Democrat Party because they're dissatisfied, but they're not walking away from the duopoly. And if we're going to move this country forward, we're really going to start solving our problems. And I think maybe one of the most important issues is end the divisiveness. The beautiful thing, I've been active in libertarian politics off and on, for quite some time. And no matter who I'm talking to, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they're always willing to listen, because there's so much hate and animosity built up between the two parties that a third voice is very helpful. And a third voice can be a little bit more unifying and at least open up the lines of communication. Voting for a third party candidate, if we could get some third party candidates in office who could start being that. Somebody needs to be the adult in the room. And I think that's where you look at third-party candidates coming in and being able to fill that role as kind of like a peacemaker who can bridge the gap between the right and the left a little bit and get us at least talking to each other. Because I think if we thought Clinton-Trump was bad, Biden-Trump is going to be a disaster. And I have genuine concerns about what's going to happen, mail-in voting and accusations of voter fraud. And if this is a close race and the results are challenged, I think we're going to have a lot of problems in this country. But I'm just hoping that more people will take a look at the Libertarian Party. I hope more people will look at the Libertarian candidate and make that look like a realistic option for people. We're going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. This is a real option for you, and you should take advantage of it. And the more people who do, the more people who answer the poll, I'm voting Joe Jorgensen. If we can even get her included in the polls, that's another issue. The more people will go, okay, there is another option. And as soon as there's a threshold, right, of support where all of a sudden all these people who say I'd vote for her, but she can't win, will suddenly start going, hey, maybe she can win. Maybe I will vote for her. And I think once that dam breaks, everything changes. And as bad of a situation as our country's in right now, this might be the time. And if you're a non-voter, if you're a person who hasn't gone into the voting booth because you're so disgusted, you guys can save the country, because there's more of you than there are people who are going to vote for either candidate. So get down there and vote third party. If you are not willing to vote because you're so disgusted with the two, then what do you care who wins or loses? Go down and vote third party, and you could be the voice that changes the country. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I hope more libertarians will get out there on social media and be more aggressive and talk more about why they are where they, because we're all different. We're all individuals. My reasons for voting for Joe Jorgensen aren't necessarily your reasons for voting for her. So I hope more libertarians will get out there and share why they feel that she's a good candidate, because social media is the place where we can maybe try and level the playing field a little bit, because we're never going to spend as much money as the Republicans and Democrats are. So this is where we need to be strong, and we need to share this message. If you thought I did a decent job today talking about Joe Jorgensen, I hope you will, and you support what I have to say. I hope you will share this, strike up a conversation, talk about the Libertarian Party, throw it on your wall or on whatever feed you're on social media, and have conversations and talk to people about it, and get the word out there. So, hey, thanks for sticking with me here. I'm going to get this one up, and I will be back probably on Sunday. I don't know if I'm going to do live on Sunday or if I'm going to do a pre-recorded on Sunday, probably pre-recorded, but maybe I'll go live. So watch out for that. I'll be talking about basic economics, which I am finally getting to where I have time to sit down and really invest time in reading that book, and hopefully putting up some good content on Thomas Sowell's amazing work. So that'll be Sunday. Like I said, either live or a pre-recorded show, but that's what I plan on discussing. And thank you very much for stopping by. And as always, we'll see you guys next time. Shut her down.